Now you move into 26 years of open wheel racing leadership for what was known as American Racing Series, the Firestone Indy Lights, and then the IRL Pro Series. Is that about right? 26 years?
Yeah, but yes, it was.
A long time.
But that was all part of my March connection. Like we said earlier on, connections in this business were everything. And John Bishop had just given me the ultimatum. Do you want to write rules or sell cars? And at this stage, I'd become a father for the second time. My daughter was born in '84, Leslie, and we just had our son Julian in '85. Carolyn was eager to get back to Michigan because her parents were up in Marlette, way up in the middle of nowhere. And so I thought, I don't know what I want to do. And just as I was trying to make up my mind whether I want to write rules or sell cars, I get a call from my friend Robin Hurd. He said, "Hey, Raj, we're going to start a new series in America." I said, "Really? What? Who's we?" He said, "Well, it's going to be a junior IndyCar series along the lines of the FIA F3000 series. In Europe, we're going to use the FIA F3000 chassis, but with an American engine." And I said, "Who's the we?" He said, "Well, Patrick's putting up the money, I'm putting up the cars, and you're going to run it." And that was really the time that it made up my mind for me. And so we bought a house here in Clarkston and moved back here in November '85. And
so Carolyn's happy. She's back in
happy.
Michigan.
She's with a few grandchildren, or
Yes.
her parents are. They got their grandchildren back in Clarkston or in Michigan. And I'm happy because I got a job now running a new series. And our first race was in April of 1986. And we had 14 cars at the first event. And it was a struggle because from when they decided they were going to do it at the end of '85 to get all those cars built and whatever, first we thought it was going to be a Chevrolet engine, and we went to visit Chevrolet, and I think it was Herb Fischel who was in charge of Chevrolet racing in those days. I think Herb might have done it, but the marketing people, it didn't suit their open wheel racing, didn't suit what Chevrolet wanted to do in those days. But there was a guy named, I can't remember right off, my mind's going a bit, at Buick, Ed Mertz. They said, "Go
General manager of Buick.
Yeah, so they sent us up to see Ed Mertz. And after a short while, I think it was Robin, myself, and I'm not sure if Patrick went with us. Yeah, he'd love to do it. He gave us 36 engines. And we had...
you to parcel out to the teams?
Well, but because it was a spec series, they had to all be equal. We had 12 built by Jim Ruggles in Atlanta. Dennis Weglars built 12 up in Minnesota. And Dennis Fisher built the other 12, I think, in California. But we sent them all to George Montgomery, who's one of your Hall of Fame people in Dayton, Ohio. And there was quite a disparity. I mean, nothing wrong. I mean, the guys had just built 12 engines each. So they were all adjusted on George's dyno. And that's how we started. Then from that day on till the very, very end of the Buick era, which was, I think, 2000, 15 years, all those engines were built by George and Greg Montgomery. But we had some great times, and so 86, 7, 8, 9, 90, we ran Goodyear tires. In 1990 at Denver, this guy Al Spire, who I'd known from, we ran a Mustang at Daytona in '81, I think, and that was my last race with McLaren. Where I'd already signed up with him, so but John gave me the time to go down there and run it. We ran 24 hours, and I think it was on 2 sets of the new HPR radials. They'd had the problem with the steel-belted radials, and we're trying to promote this thing. Anyway, we had a good relationship. Firestone had paid for part of that program, and we were in Denver, and Al came and he said, "Raj, what would it cost Firestone to put their tires on your series?" I said, "Oh, I don't know," and I shot him a number, which was way more than we were getting from Goodyear. He said, "I'll get back with you." And I thought, "Oh, yeah, I bet you will." A couple of weeks later, Sandy Graydon, who was my secretary at that time, called and he said, "Roger, there's a guy named Al Spire on the phone for you." So I got on the phone. "Hey, Al, how you doing?" He said, "Good. We had the board meeting and they've agreed to do it." And it was ironic because I'd been on
the Firestone Indy Lights series is born.
Yeah, this was part of the deal. Right. You have to change the name from American Racing Series to Firestone, and they want the term Indy in there. And I called Tony George, and they had the rights to any racing entity that had the term Indy. And I think if I remember rightly, Tony charged us $100 a year to put Indy into the title. And of course, for the last 2 or 3 years, I'd been on to Leo Mel about building me a rain tire, because up until then, all they'd do was hand groove slicks and we'd race them in the rain. At Laguna Seca in 1990, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Leo had a big press announcement that they'd built this new rain tire for the American Racing Series. At midday on the same day, we announced we were going to run Firestones the following year.
Oh.
I gave Leo the opportunity, and I'd called him. I said, Leo, Firestone want to get in, and they're going to offer a lot more. He said, well, you better take it. They're very, casual. I think he thought that would never happen. Short stories, they did. And so 1991, we had our first, apart from changing the name, the other thing that we had to do was to go from a 13-inch wheel to a 15-inch wheel, but kept the same rolling diameter. The OD was the same, and we did all that, and it transformed that March chassis beyond belief, because in the old days, the Goodyear had a very tall sidewall. It would load up and then spring it back. It was hard to catch. It was a very short wheelbase car. And then, of course, Firestone wanted something more modern, and that's when in 1993 we had the first of the Lola configuration, and that lasted through till 1997. And we had the second generation Lola. And then in 97, CART went public, and they had nothing to declare use of proceeds, which I guess, I don't know much about money and IPOs, but you had to have something to declare what you're going to spend it on to your investors. And Pat said, do you want to sell it? I said, well, I've got a job. He said, well, you'll have a job for 4 years anyway. So in 97, we sold Indy Lights, Firestone Indy Lights, to IndyCar. Everything was going well, and then they had a change of CFOs or CEOs in IndyCar. We had a string of them, people there. We had an underwear salesman and a bunch of people. Anyway, the last one in 2000 was Mr. Heitzler, and he and I didn't see eye to eye. And I had an interview in Milwaukee with a Milwaukee gentleman about some of the problems that we were encountering, and we were. IndyCar didn't put the same effort into it that we put into it when we owned it, and it was going downhill, and I probably said some things that I shouldn't have said, and the next thing I know, Mr. Heitzler's telling me that it's probably time for me to go. But unbeknownst to him, in the meantime, I'd had a couple of discussions with Tony George, who wanted to start his own series in Indianapolis. So Heitzler let me go on November the 5th, 2000. I think it was November 5th. I'm trying to think it was 2000 or 2001. I think it's 2001. I went on November the 5th. I was out of IndyCar, but November the 9th, I started at the Speedway. And we started the Infinity Pro Series, and that became very successful. And I mean, some of the guys that I worked with for those last 13 years are still racing today. The Scott Dixons, Helio Castroneves, Tony Kanaan, and all those guys are still, those were guys that we had.
That brings us up to modern times and or to current times. And I can't thank you enough for running through this amazing journey from the 1950s up to present day. You're still so highly respected. Everyone that I encounter here through the Hall of Fame that knows you speaks so highly of you, and that is a reputation you've earned, and I can't thank you enough for sharing the stories with us today.
Well, I'm not sure that I deserve it, but I've tried to be friendly. And I found that even in the IMSA GTP days, I learned this a lot from John Bishop, as I said. And, if somebody was a little bit, you didn't send them home. You said, get that fixed for next race. It's not quite what we're looking for. Today, they send you home. And I think the same with Indy Lights. Always tried to accommodate everybody. And ironically, I raced for 53 years. That's all I did in racing, other than my year in the boat business. Raced for 53 years. I got fired twice in my life. Once by Joe Heitzler, and then in 2012, Randy Bernard had a difference of opinion. And it was he came back from England one day, all pumped up. He said, "I've signed the third engine." I said, "Oh, good, great, Randy. Who'd you sign?" He said, "I signed Lotus." I said, "You did what?" He said, "I've signed Lotus. What's the problem with that?" I said, "Randy, Lotus never built a racing engine." "Of course they did. How do you think they went racing?" So I said, "Well," I said, "I explained it. I went through the first 7. I said the Mark 9 had an MG, the 10 had a Bristol, the 11 had a Climax, the 12 had a Climax.
Other people were doing it for Lotus.
Yes, right the way up to number 40. And I said, "And do you know what? Lotus never built one of those engines." And that was the beginning of the end of me and Randy. And then finally in 2012, he said it was time for me to go. Unfortunately, that week I just signed up with the HR to have a knee put in.
Well,
So,
good, you got your knee
got my
before
knee
you
in.
left. Last question.
Yeah.
And it's one I ask everyone who comes to the Hall of Fame or that we do time with on video like this. If 100 years from now, your great-great-grandchildren stop by the Hall of Fame and they watch this video of you, what do you hope their impression of you is? What impression do you hope you leave behind you?
Try and be as honest as you can, as friendly as you can, without going too far over. But I think when I look back, it was just the friends that I made that really controlled my life. I mean, going back to Bruce and Chris and Denny and those guys, I mean, I could have been, over there on a different wavelength, but just, I think the friends that you make in life, the real friends, it's very, very important. And I think, 100 years from now, that ain't gonna, well, I shouldn't say that going on what's going on now, but I hope that 100 years from now, it's still part of the criteria. The relationships are everything. I mean, you can be out there on your own in left field if you want, but it's a long, lonely life. And I look back at my 53 years, and I don't think there's one day where I got up and thought, "Oh, hell, I've got to go to work today." I mean, it was like I had a hobby for 53 years. And, I'd hate to tell Teddy and Roger and some of those, I would have probably done it for nothing because it was that much fun. But it paid me well, and thanks to my friend Robin Hood and Pat Patrick, I'm able to retire.
Well, it's an amazing story, and Roger, we're grateful that you shared it with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Been fun.
On behalf of the Hall of Fame, thank you to our supporters who support this series, and especially Mr. Roger Bailey, who spent time with us today.